We already know who the Green Bay Packers are going to draft this weekend. I'll tell you what I mean.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you here on the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. We already know who the Green Bay Packers are going to select. They're telling us. We can also look at the Miami Dolphins and who they are looking at. That might offer a little bit of clarity into the Packers process. Plus, I have a low-stakes conspiracy theory that I am excited to share with you at the end of the show. But let's start with my bold claim that we already know who the Packers are going to draft. I was looking at it. I put together this spreadsheet that I put way too much effort into with Packers types and Packer visits and all this stuff. It was a good way for me to organize my thoughts and try and make some predictions, try and look at some different things and the trends and all the stuff we do here, when we set the board and all that stuff. It was actually a thought that occurred to me after we did the episode and I was going back through, and there was actually a couple of corrections I wanted to make and things I wanted to say that I had too many notes and things to get to. In a draft where, as I have said 1,000 times in this process, the difference between the 30th player and the 50th player, the difference between the 40th player and the 75th player, the difference between the 60th player and the 100th player is as small as I can remember. And I think we're going to be in for some weirdness over Thursday, Friday, and into Saturday, where guys we expected to go in the first round are going to go in the middle or the late second part, and the guys we expected to go late second are going to go late first. It's just one of those flat drafts. And in those moments when prospects are separated by the thinnest of margins, what do you fall back on? You fall back on these little edges, informational edges. Do you have more testing information on a particular player than another? Do you, for example, have top 30 visits, top being a misnomer here, but 30 visits with those players? Did you get to know them a little bit better, and therefore you have more information on that player just by virtue of time spent? There's sweat equity there than you do for other players in the draft. And I put together, after we went and set the board and I did my whole mock draft process, I went through and I realized you could do a mock basically straight through of just Packer visits. That's the way that these visits are sort of set up. So just by way of example, 52, Chris Brazzell. He is right in that range. Now there's a couple players in that range. Chris Brazzell and AJ Halsey, 55 and 56. Packers visits. You could add Lee Hunter and Kristen Miller in there. Those guys are a little bit further up. Now, it also has to be said, none of those four names, none of those guys have either tested. 3 of the 4 have not tested. Lee Hunter tested and tested poorly. So there is actually information to gather there. So it's like, okay, if you don't have an athletic profile and we might want to draft you, we need to get that information. But you could just, so let's just play this out. Chris Brazzell at 52. Now we learned since yesterday that the Packers had a visit, a Zoom visit with Mike Washington. That's right in the range where they have that second round pick. He's the 76th player on their board. And guess what? 76, 77, and 78 on the consensus board are all Packers visits. There's no one between 56 and 77 and no one between 78 and 106. Doesn't that seem like they're telling us they're looking at those guys? It's Mike Washington Jr., Ted Hurst, and Romello Height. And with the added interest for Mike Washington Jr. and the need at running back, you put him there. Now, Will Lee is the only visit that they've had between 78 and 139. So let's just say he falls to 120. Cool. Now at 153, you could draft Caleb Proctor, who's 139 on the consensus board. That's certainly close enough. Well, you've got another pick right after that at 160. Well, Charles Deming is 145 on the consensus board. They have two players right in the range where they have two picks. And those guys, by the way, have athletic testing and are no doubt Packers types. Go down a little bit further. Now, we're stretching a little bit here, but if you go down a little bit further, you get down to Kalen Black. Kalen Black is at 216 on the consensus board. Well, the Packers have a pick at 201. Right in that range. And then you have a bunch of guys on day 3. Jordan Vandenberg is 249 on the consensus board. They have a pick at 236. There's no one that they've met with between Kalen Black at 216 and Jordan Vandenberg at 249. They just happened to want to have two players projected to go right where they're going to pick. Oh, interesting. And then 295, 296, and 300, there's three more guys. Michael Heldman, the pass rusher from Central Michigan, Baron Morton, the quarterback from Texas Tech, and Jaden Duggar, the linebacker from Louisiana. So you could just put Vandenberg at 236 and pick one of those guys at 255. It maps almost perfectly on the consensus board. Now, we know the Packers don't do this by consensus. If we wanted to go another way, you could do Kristen Miller. Let's say he makes it to 52. Well, he doesn't have athletic numbers, but you did have a meeting with him. Kristen Miller. Now you get to 84. You can take Ted Hurst. Right in the range where you're meeting. Caleb Proctor. Now this is actually more in line with where I think Caleb Proctor is going to go and where he's 139 on the board. You're more likely to have him be available. At 160, we found out that Jagger Burton, 176, the center from Kentucky, 176 on the consensus board. They have a pick at 153 or 160, excuse me. Then you could take Kalen Black, Michael Heldman, and then, you pick another one of those guys, Jaden Duggar. It just seems too convenient. Like, this is the definition of the Windhorse fingers. Now, why would they do that? Why would they meet specifically with players right in the range? Because it'd be really nice to have more information in a draft that is separated by marginal differences. Such a flat draft. You want to have those little advantages. So you like someone, you bring them in. Now you like someone, you brought them in and you're sitting there and you're going, well, not much separates this from this. But when we met with Kalen Black, we really liked this about him. And that becomes a separator. And by the way, I'm not even advocating for this as a good thing necessarily. Sometimes you can become smitten with a player in a pre-draft visit and go, we love that guy. And it can paper over some flaws that they have, or they chew with their mouth full, or, they took a phone call or something little that maybe would speak to something, but you had some doubts and now you've made it a bigger deal than it really should be because you already had a little bit of doubt. And if you hadn't had that meeting, it amplifies the doubt. If you hadn't had the meeting, you would have been in a different position and maybe you make a mistake because you blow something out of proportion where if you just didn't have any information additionally, you'd feel better about that player and would have been more likely to draft them when you should have. Of course, you don't know in the moment which one you're doing or you wouldn't make the mistake. But it struck me going through all of this going, oh my God. Like there's play and if we want to take this game one step further, the Packers have had 2 meetings with players expected to go in the late 30s. They've had multiple Zooms with Chris Johnson, according to reports. And they had a 30 visit with Maxi Inachor, the offensive tackle, the developmental offensive tackle from Arizona State. Potential trade up candidates. Like this is almost mapped too perfectly to the point where you're like, what is going on here? Like they wouldn't really just be this obvious, would they? But it actually makes sense to gather that information and then use that information, or to say, we really like these guys in these spots. This is where we think how the draft is going to fall, more or less. We really like these guys in these ranges. Let's get to know them a little bit better so we can feel more comfortable drafting them when the time comes. I actually think this is a terrific use of resources. And I'm telling you right now, and I said this in the group chat, there's receipts, and I'll say it on the podcast, so there's receipts. If you look at their 30 visits, I think they will draft 4, 5, maybe even 6 guys from their 30 visits in this class. And you look at last year, like half their draft class was in for visits. This is something that they've been doing lately, where they've had these guys in. It wasn't something that used to be a thing, because Ted Thompson only would have a handful of guys on the top of the list in, would never draft them. Like famously, Jair Alexander, who was a Brian Gutekunst pick, had no idea the Packers were going to draft him. So I think they've changed their ways a little bit here now. Let's test this theory. And we can test this theory because a former Brian Gutekunst lieutenant has a head job now. Who are the Miami Dolphins looking at? Interesting. That's next. You know that feeling around dinner time when you're starving, maybe a little hangry, and somehow there's nothing in the fridge? That's why Home Chef is the easiest way to have real balanced meals ready to go without the stress. I had this experience tonight as I was going, oh no, we need to make dinner, and I really don't have time to go out and get stuff. Home Chef makes cooking simple. You get fresh ingredients delivered right to your door, easy to follow recipes and meals that actually taste great. Not long shopping lists, no complicated prep, and best of all, easy cleanup. There are over 30 meals to choose from every week, so you're not stuck eating the same thing over and over. And honestly, the meals feel restaurant quality. It's like having a personal chef without the cost. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering my listeners 50% off and free shipping on your first box, plus, get this, dessert for life. Go to homechef.com/lockedonnfl. That's homechef.com/lockedonnfl for 50% off your first box and free dessert for life. Homechef.com/lockedon. Must be an active subscriber to receive the free dessert. Spring is an actual annual reset point. It's a natural one. And if there's one thing that can quietly cost businesses money, it's messy communication. Missed calls, scattered texts, no clear thread of who said what. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2 with over 3,000 recipes, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses. It lets your entire team share one business number so you never miss a call, text, or opportunity. Everything lives in one clean thread: calls, texts, voicemails. It makes your business feel more organized, more responsive. Make this season the one no opportunity, no customer slips away. Try Quo free and get 20% off your first 6 months at quo.com/lockedonnfl. That's quo.com/lockedonnfl. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. Don't forget to check out the Everydayer Club for ad-free episodes and access to the group chat with me and Locked On Packers listeners. Tap the link in the show notes or go to lockedonpackers.supercast.com for more. As I've been asked to be on Dolphins radio, Dolphins podcasts, and they want to know about the Packers types. They want to know about this concept. They want to know what could change about what the Dolphins are doing. And that has been how I have thought about this. But Justice Mosqueda at APC, Acme Packing Company, had a novel idea. Who are the Dolphins looking at? And what is the overlap? And there are some very interesting names for overlap. It has to be said, that means there's a good chance the Packers are going to be competing with the Miami Dolphins for some of the players that they really like. And in basically every round, the Dolphins are going to have a higher pick than the Packers. Now, in the first round, this is not a problem. The Dolphins have multiple first-round picks. They will pick twice. I think they'll actually pick 3 times before the Packers are even on the board. So they will get their pick of these top guys. But as we look at them, do they solidify some of the ways that we think about Packers types and Packers players? So when he put together this list, the visitors at the top are guys that we don't have to worry about because the Packers are not going to take any of them. Mansour Lane, Mekhi Lemon. I'm not even going to go through them. It doesn't really matter. But both looked at Max Iheanacho, which tells you that pre-draft visit, whether it was we think we can draft him or not, or we think he's worth trading up for or not, the Dolphins may just flat out get the chance to draft him. They almost certainly will get the chance with their top pick, and they almost certainly will not take him with the top pick, but then they have that second first-round pick from the Broncos, and he could be there. This tells me that there is real interest there, that he checks boxes for the Packers, and that makes sense. He tested outstanding. He's a young, developing player who's new to the game, and there is tantalizing upside there for a team that might want offensive linemen. And the Dolphins, they could use some upgrades at offensive line. And so it's not a surprise. Now, I did also notice Caden McDonald is on this list. Probably would have been in play to be a Packer in the first round. The Dolphins will probably get one, if not two, chances to draft him if they want to. Ty Simpson, I don't think is relevant. Now, Zion Young is interesting because Zion Young, I mentioned him as a Packers type yesterday, and in retrospect, I shouldn't have. Some of the early testing numbers for him were really good, and I think they were unofficial. And the official numbers, or the consensus numbers, like if you look at RAS, Zion Young has a 7.68 relative athletic score. Well, for a top pick for the Packers, that is just not going to be good enough for a pass rusher. If you look at the pass rushers the Packers have targeted, they have all, at least at the top of the draft, have been elite athletes. Kingsley Enagbare is the least athletic guy, and he was a day 3 pick in 2022 when they had 1 million draft picks. A very different scenario than, the Dolphins, who have a pick in the 40s, and then the Packers at pick 52. It just doesn't fit with what we generally see the Packers do. When they've taken guys without testing, the only guy that they took without testing in the top 100 in the Brian Gutekunst era is Josh Myers, and he was hurt. I think they want to see that stuff stamped. Now, we'll get to my conspiracy theory in a minute. They also brought in Chase Bizantis, the guard from Texas A&M, which is interesting because the Packers traditionally, going back to Ted Thompson, do not draft interior offensive linemen. Now, the exception that they made was Elton Jenkins. He could play multiple positions, and there is a thought that Chase Bizantis could play multiple positions in the NFL. He could be a guard. He could be a center. Now, the Dolphins have a really good center, so I don't quite understand that one. But then this is where it gets interesting. They've also had Christian Miller, AJ Halsey, and Ted Hurst in for visits. And the Halsey one in particular is interesting because he does not have testing. And I think he makes more sense for the Packers given their potential search for a nickel linebacker, dime linebacker, safety hybrid type. Whereas that's not really someone that Jeff Hafley was all that interested in. Now, maybe he would have been had he had a player like that, but this makes my antenna go up. And then you throw in Ted Hurst. Ted Hurst, Packers type, that makes him a Dolphins type. And boy, do they need receivers. Now, if they're going to take a receiver in the first round, they don't need to do it in the second or the third, but they could double dip. Like if they use the 10th pick on a receiver and a third round pick, like that's not that big a deal. Plus Ted Hurst, potentially a different type of player than the receivers that they were looking at, Mekhi Lemon, Denzel Boston. If they went that route, now Casey Concepcion can move, but Ted Hurst would be a complementary piece. Like those guys could all play together. And then the day 3 players, the only overlap is Charles Demings. Definitely going to be someone that the Packers are going to have to compete with for that guy. And Kalen Black, the running back from Indiana. Now, I also want to flag Talon Green from Arkansas because he's someone we talked about with Jason Hirschhorn. He checks a lot of the boxes for day 3 Packers quarterbacks. The athletic ability, the starts, the experience, all that stuff. No, he is raw, even as an experienced player. But it makes sense that if the Packers were going to like him, that the Dolphins would also like him. So I think this just confirms for us that Kalen Black, Charles Demings have the kind of profile that would interest the Packers enough to want to learn more, whether that is because they really want to draft them or because they're appealing enough players to want to confirm you don't want to draft them for whatever reason, or you want to bring them in to basically convince yourself that you can draft them. To me, this confirms interest. This confirms they're bringing Kristen Miller in because they like him. They're bringing AJ Halstein in because they like him. They're bringing in Ted Hurst because they like him. Charles Demings, Kalen Black. And so this goes to my original point. The Packers are telling us, who they want to draft. Now, whether or not they actually get to draft them, whether or not those players are available in a range where it makes sense to pick them is going to be a horse of a very different color. But we know, and we, you know, the blogosphere, the podcast space, Brian Gutekunst has types. We know this. And whether he likes to talk about it or not, some people get really mad about that. They don't use RAS. Okay, they use something close enough that it maps near perfectly on top of it. Whether they literally use, no, they probably don't literally use RAS. They probably have their own model that works and cashes out very similarly to RAS because they follow it. And very few teams have followed it as closely as the Packers over the Brian Gutekunst era. So we have a good idea of the kinds of players they tend to like. And their pre-draft visits are telling us a lot. Now, I want to make the devil's advocate case here. Let's do that next.
Hey, it's Matt Derry from the Locked On Lions podcast. The people I love depend on me. If I'm gone, the financial responsibilities don't disappear. I didn't want my family figuring things out during the hardest moment of their lives. That's why I knew only one place to go. I chose life insurance through my friends at Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. I love the folks at Ethos. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get the free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. That is ETHOS.com/LockedOnNFL. Ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Application times and rates may vary.
This theory applies specifically to the pick at 52. And to me, what it supports is trading down. And I'll tell you why. If you look at the players that the Packers have visited with at the top of this draft, Chris Johnson was not a 30 visit, but he was a Zoom and apparently multiple Zooms from what I understand. They have a lot of interest and there's been reported interest in Chris Johnson. They would have to trade up for Chris Johnson. Now, we did not talk about Jermon McCoy. We are going to talk about Jermon McCoy tomorrow because according to Albert Breer, he could fall into the second round, and a really talented cornerback fell in the draft because of injury questions last year. The Cardinals with Jonathan Gannon picked him and he turned out to be a really good football player. So at the very least, Jonathan Gannon could go, hey, I've been in this position before. Like, the window is win now. You could get a guy who was talked about after he ran at his pro day to go in the top 10, could be cornerback 1. And he actually ran fast. Will Johnson ran slow. Jermon McCoy ran 4.38. We're going to talk about that. But if you look at these guys at the top of the draft, I mentioned Maxi Iheanacho. Not really in range. You'd have to trade up to get him. After that, I talked about this in the open. Christian Miller has no athletic profile. And I think if he had one, it would not be particularly good. And certainly not the kind of athletic profile that the Packers tend to want, especially at premium positions in the second round. Lee Hunter has a bad athletic profile. Would be by far the worst athlete the Packers have taken in the top 100 basically ever. Like since before Ted Thompson was in charge. Okay, that's weird. Further down the board, Chris Brazzell. Now, I put him as a Packers green light, but he does not have a full athletic profile. He ran a 40. He's got a 10-yard split. He's got a flying 20, but he does not have a full athletic profile. He does not have jumps, which the Packers care about. They want to know what your explosiveness quotient is. They want to know, are you explosive? Now, you can see it on tape, but you like to stamp it, right? Especially in a weird-ass Tennessee offense that is beyond fake. I mean, it is a video game. It is nonsense. It would be unlike the Packers to draft a player without a full athletic profile or something close to it, something without a relative athletic score who wasn't hurt, especially in this draft. I've said I think it's too much of a risk. At least he's got a 40, but is that really what they want to do in such a pivotal year? Take a chance on a guy? AJ Halsey, same thing. We're talking about non-premium position, non-starter, probably, and he doesn't have an athletic profile. This is when I have to bring back the Windhorse fingers. What is going on here? And yet you look at the players in the 70s that they've talked to, Mike Washington, Ted Hurst, and Romello Height, they have full athletic profiles and they're really good athletes. What if what the Packers are doing with those top interviews is saying, okay, we like these players. Let's be sure we don't really, really want to draft them. Because maybe you move up to Chris Jones. Do we really want to move up for Maxi Inaudible? Maybe we do. Let's talk to him. And then you can decide. Do you really want to draft Lee Hunter with a bad athletic profile? Well, let's talk to him. We'd really we like Christian Miller's tape, but we don't know what the athleticism is. Not really. Plus Georgia, what they're asked to do is always weird. They always have great athletes, but he doesn't look like a great athlete. Let's be sure we don't want to draft him. And then you trade down. And you could get two of Ted Hurst, Mike Washington, and Romello Height, or other players in that range. I think it could certainly be the case that they're looking at guys in that range who don't fit. It's interesting, they did not meet with, say, Derek Moore, the edge from Michigan, who I think would be Packers-y, but does not have an athletic profile. Something we've talked about before is there's a lot of guys in that range who just don't fit what the Packers are looking for, and therefore it doesn't make sense to draft them. So it kind of makes sense that they haven't talked to a lot of those guys. But let's say some of those linebackers are there. Well, maybe they just feel comfortable enough with those guys. Or maybe they don't like any of those guys. And in some ways, I think that is the scenario that is more likely. When you look at the players they've talked to, it's players you'd think they would otherwise like, but have these question marks. And then you go, okay, well, what if they just would rather move down? They would rather be sure. You get those extra picks in the fourth round, as I mentioned. Denver, San Francisco, Houston could all be willing to move up for the right player in the second. You move back to the late 50s, the early 60s. And then you feel better about taking a Dominique Orange. You feel better about taking a Kyle Lewis, Malachi Fields, Mike Washington, Ted Hurst, Romello Height, Davis Igbinosun, Malik Muhammad. And the more I think about it, the more I think, by the way, that Malik Muhammad is the cornerback target on day 2 that I would want. Just the fit in this system. A lot of things that I like about that. I'm trying to put pieces together. This is me doing the Windhorse fingers. Why are they doing it like this? Why have they not talked to anyone projected to go at 52 that fits all of their normal athletic models? Why haven't they talked to any of those players, but they've talked to multiple guys in the 3rd round who do? In a draft where they're already down draft picks. Why would they do that? Maybe because they want to trade down. They don't want to take anybody at 52 because they don't think the board is going to fall the right way. And if the board falls the right way, if Malachi Lawrence, if Gabe Akis is there at 52, they're just like, hell yeah, we're taking that guy. If someone falls to them, if Jermon McCoy, holy cow, falls to them at 52, you run the card in. And then you're in no worse position than you were when you started thinking you were going to have to trade down. No, you got a guy that you love. But if you think the likelihood is you're not going to get a guy that you love, and you can roll back and still take two guys that you really like, that seems like a pretty good scenario. And we went through them yesterday, why it makes so much sense to trade down. I have become convinced. And when we do a final mock, I will be putting in a trade. I do not think the Packers are going to pick at 52. I think they will either go up for someone, go down for someone, and if they pick at 52, it will be for someone who fell. It will be for a Malachi Lawrence. It will be for a Jermod McCoy, someone who was a fringe first-round player that just happened to be there for them. And they were like, okay, we had a trade in place, but like we can't not draft this player. I think the odds are greater than 50-50 that they trade out of 52. And my money would be on they're moving back. All right, back tomorrow with much more. We've got an extra Goodies Guys coming this week. We're going to have a Goodies Guys every single day this week. And guess what? The beauty of it is we can have one Friday during the day because the Packers probably are not going to pick on Thursday. So we'll have one Thursday. Packers don't pick till Friday night. I'll have an extra Friday one for you. We're going to have so much content for you that it's going to be crazy. You're not even going to know what to do with all the content we've got for you coming this week. Live after the first round on Thursday, live after the second and third rounds on Friday. And then on Saturday, we've got a roundtable exercise where we're going to break down everything, go through these players, and have an absolute blast. We will do that for you because we love you. We really do. We love doing this. This is honestly, I almost said it's my favorite time, and then I knew I was gonna catch flack for that, but it's kind of my favorite time of the year. Like playoff football is great, but it's also stressful, and then you got to deal with the end of the season, and like that's stress. This is just fun. I have an absolute blast doing this every single year because it's stress free for me. It's just fun to talk about these players. I love talking about these players, and I love hearing from you guys about the players you love and the players you absolutely do not want to see the Packers draft. So follow me on the social medias, subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts. Watch on YouTube where we're going to be live a bunch this week. Squad shows, all that good stuff is still happening this week. We're always here for you to stay locked on Packers.